There's something about small towns at night that feels untouched, frozen in time. Now imagine that stillness in the year 1912. No traffic. No glowing screens. Just the soft creak of wood settling and the distant sound of wind brushing across the Iowa plains. We often look at cases like this as old headlines. Yellowed newspaper clippings. Names in history books. But when I first sat down and read through the original reports from Villisca, I had to pause. Because what happened inside that quiet White House wasn't just a mystery. It was a tragedy that changed a community forever. 8 people lost their lives inside that home. And more than a century later, no one has ever been officially held responsible. Today, I want to walk through this case with you. Not just the facts, but the feeling of it. The questions that still linger. Villisca, Iowa. Population, just over 2,000 people. The year is 1912, and this is a town where reputation means everything. Where families have lived for generations. Where a scandal is someone showing up late to church. The Moore family lived at 508 East 2nd Street. And by all accounts, they were well respected in the community. Josiah Moore, 43 years old, worked as a businessman. He provided for his family. Sarah Moore, his wife, was 39. Devoted mother. Active in the community. They had 4 children. Herman, 11. Catherine, 10. Boyd, 7. And Paul, who was only 5 years old. On the night of June 9, 1912, the Moore family attended a church event, a children's program at the Presbyterian Church. The kids were excited. It was one of those small-town gatherings where half the town shows up just to support the children. 2 other children were there that night, Ina and Lena Stillinger. They were sisters, ages 8 and 12. The Moore children had become friends with them, and that evening, they asked if Ina and Lena could sleep over. Sarah Moore agreed. What felt like a small, generous gesture would set in motion the most devastating night the Moore family would ever face. The service ended around 9:30 p.m. Witnesses saw the Moore family walking home with Ina and Lena. They were laughing. Talking. Just being a family. By 10 p.m., they were home. The house went dark shortly after. And then, silence. The next morning, Mary Peckham, a neighbor, noticed something unusual. The Moore family always rose early. Josiah had work. The children had chores. But on this morning, there was no movement. No sounds. The house remained completely still. Mary tried calling out. No response. She tried knocking. Nothing. When I read Mary's testimony, I noticed she mentioned feeling a sense of dread even before opening that door. She said the air felt wrong. Too still. She eventually contacted Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, who had a key. What Ross found when he stepped inside that house, it defies comprehension. All 8 individuals had lost their lives while they slept. Each one had been struck with an axe, multiple times. The brutality was. I'm going to be very careful with my words here, but the reports indicate this was not quick. This was rage. The children were in their beds. Josiah and Sarah were in theirs. Ina and Lena, the two young guests, were together in a downstairs bedroom. None of them had time to react. None of them had time to run. They went to sleep believing they were safe. In a house they trusted. And that's what unsettles me most about this case. It's not just the events of that night. It's the shattering of sanctuary. The loss of safety. The one place meant to protect you. Now, here's where this case gets deeply unsettling, and where my questions start to pile up. The person responsible didn't just commit this act and leave. They stayed. Investigators found evidence that someone had been in the house for hours after the incident occurred. They'd covered the mirrors with clothing. They'd covered the windows. They'd placed blankets over some of the victims' faces. They'd apparently washed their hands in a basin. A bowl of water with signs of blood was found in the kitchen. And here's the detail that's always stuck with me: they'd eaten food from the Moore family's kitchen. They'd sat down, in that house, surrounded by what they'd done, and eaten a meal. Personally, this behavioral detail tells me something crucial about the person responsible. This wasn't a random act of panic. This was someone who felt comfortable enough, or disconnected enough, to remain in that space for an extended period. That suggests either extreme psychological detachment, or familiarity with the location. Maybe both. The weapon was found in the guest bedroom where Ina and Lena were discovered. It belonged to Josiah Moore. It had been stored in the house. Which means the person responsible didn't bring a weapon with them. They used what was available. And that raises a question I keep coming back to: was this premeditated? Or did something happen that night that escalated? The investigation that followed was, let's just say it was complicated. Within hours, the house was swarmed with curious townspeople. In 1912, crime scene preservation wasn't what it is today. People walked through the house. They touched things. Evidence was contaminated almost immediately. But even with all that chaos, investigators did uncover some significant leads. There were reports of a stranger seen lurking near the Moore house the night before. Multiple witnesses mentioned a man who didn't belong, someone who'd been asking questions around town. Bloodhounds were brought in. They tracked a scent from the house to the train depot, suggesting the person responsible may have left town by rail shortly after. Over the next several years, multiple individuals were investigated in connection with this case. Some were arrested. Some were tried. None were convicted. Frank F. Jones was a wealthy businessman in Villisca, and Josiah Moore's former employer. Josiah and Frank had a falling out. A business dispute. Josiah had left Frank's company and was actually in competition with him. In a small town like Villisca, that kind of rivalry, it creates tension. Witnesses reported that Frank Jones had expressed anger toward Josiah. That he'd made statements about wanting to settle the score. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say Frank Jones personally committed this act, because there's no solid evidence of that. But what I do find interesting is his connection to another suspect. A man named William Mansfield. Reverend George Kelly is, in my opinion, one of the most compelling suspects in this case, and the one law enforcement focused on most intensely. Kelly was a traveling Presbyterian minister who attended the children's program at the church on June 9, 1912, the same event the Moore family attended just hours before the incident. Multiple witnesses placed him in Villisca that night. But here's what makes Kelly stand out: he left town early the next morning, before the incident was discovered. When authorities began investigating, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He reportedly gave conflicting statements about his whereabouts. He appeared to know details of the case that had not been made public. And perhaps most striking of all, he allegedly confessed to the crime on multiple occasions, only to later recant each time. Kelly was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second resulted in an acquittal. What troubles me about George Kelly is the pattern of his behavior afterward. It suggested someone carrying a heavy burden. Psychologically, it reads like a man struggling internally. Someone who seemed close to unburdening himself, but never quite did. The prosecution couldn't prove he was responsible beyond reasonable doubt. But when I step back and look at the full picture, his presence that night, his early departure, his unusual behavior, I can't help but wonder if the jury got it wrong. Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the Moore family, was a convicted individual with a history of violence involving an axe. He'd been linked to at least 23 similar incidents across the Midwest during the same time period. His patterns matched. His movements placed him in Iowa around June 1912. But Henry Lee Moore was never definitively tied to Villisca. He was questioned. He was suspected. But nothing concrete emerged. Here's what bothers me about Henry Lee Moore: if he was responsible for this many similar cases, why wouldn't he have been stopped sooner? Why were law enforcement agencies in different states not communicating? It's one of those tragic realities of early 20th century investigations: information didn't flow the way it does now. A dangerous person could move from town to town, leaving devastation in their wake, and no one would connect the dots until it was too late. The tragedy of the Villisca case isn't just what happened to the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters. It's that the person responsible was likely identified, and walked free because the system wasn't equipped to stop them. The house still stands in Villisca, Iowa. It's been preserved as a historical site, and yes, people can visit it. Some even stay overnight. But I think there's something we need to remember about this place. This wasn't just a crime scene. This was a home. A place where children played. Where a family felt safe. Where two young girls were invited to spend the night with their friends. And in a single night, all of that was taken away. Because the truth is, darkness doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. Until the moment it chooses to reveal itself. If this deep dive meant something to you, give the video a like and subscribe with the bell on. It truly helps keep these stories remembered and discussed. And don't go just yet, I've placed 2 other cases on the screen that I think you'll find just as haunting. I'll see you over there.